Thank you guys so much. And it is very exciting to be not the last panel, but to be a panel with these incredible women. And we're going to handle this a little bit differently. I'm Kat Imhoff, and I am channeling my inner Judy Woodruff right now. But we wanted to let folks take a few moments. So I'm gonna start with Lisa to my left. And since I'm channeling my inner Judy Woodruff, she's channeling someone else. I'm going to ask each of you to say a little bit about what you are doing in the world today. And also, as you wrap up your comment on this first leg, what advice would you offer your younger self? So Lisa, who are you channeling here?
Well, thank you, Kat. I think we wound up in this conversation because Kat had noticed my gloves this morning, and so this is a nod to our Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is my personal heroine. I think it's actually quite important to have a vision for what it looks like to have a seat at the table. Right. Let me also start by thanking UVA and the presidential precinct more broadly, and I'm going to look back to comments by Mr. Goings about his many years of doing business in Indonesia and say selamat pagi, good morning, and terima kasih. Thank you very much for having me here. I want to just mention as well why CFA Institute sees a partnership with this with the objectives that we have through the Global Leadership Forum. And in addition to the internal initiatives that we have in a business resource group for women and the Women in Investment Management, CFA Institute has had a very long partnership with UVA. We're a global organization, which is a membership body and a credentialing organization with the credentialing exams currently being given in 93 countries. And the importance of a credential in economic empowerment and participation is that it's an objective measure of credibility for a woman when she walks into the room and demands that seat at the table. I've been with CFA Institute for 3 years. I'm head of the CFA program, and prior to that I was 21 years in investment management. And I was and am really excited to be what I see in the not-for-profit world, but in a very profitable industry, investment management and asset management, in wearing the white hats. So CFA Institute has a very strong impact worldwide in advocacy.
Well, and to that point, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about financial literacy. As someone who's really good at my work financial literacy, but very poor at my personal, I'd like to kind of plant that seed because I think that's an important point of where do we stand as women. What would be your advice to your younger self right now?
Well, beyond the comment I've already made about demanding that seat at the table, my comment would be to always have a view of where you are headed next and to be open to any opportunities, any competencies that you have, to not underestimate how they can be applied quite broadly.
So Samm is a fellow graduate from the School of Architecture here at the University of Virginia. Just get another little plug in for UVA since we are seated here. And I think that you've had this very interesting background in real estate development, but tell us a little bit more about what you're doing today and kind of what your advice would be to yourself.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you, Jim, for allowing me to be here. It's actually an honor, and I'm getting more from you all than I'm probably going to give you, so let's
Except
just go
maybe a job, you never know, right?
Always open to having folks in our shop. It's something that we focus on. I did graduate from UVA in 1986 with my degree in architecture with the hopes of being the female version of Frank Lloyd Wright. Very space, love and peace and happiness, and realized very quickly that there's only one Frank Lloyd Wright, male or female, doesn't matter. So I kind of moved into the real estate world and really set about ensuring that when I demand that seat at the table, I am certain that I am qualified to be there. So I have probably done every job in the investment management realm, from being an architect, being a super on a job site, picture that, age 21, me telling 55-year-old white men what to do. Tough, but I did it, went home every day with a few tears in my eyes and came back every day stronger than ever. So I think today that's really kind of manifested itself in the fact that I own a private equity firm with a woman up in New York, and we have what I call control over our culture. We want to change culture. I think changing culture is difficult. And if you want to change culture, you have to create your own. So I would tell myself, play the long game. Don't play the short game, play the long game.
That's great. So, Megan, I love the tagline. Yeah, thank you. That deserves some. And I'm hearing a lot of resilience there too. But so, Megan, I love the tagline of your on your website, the one campaign, and it was "Actions Speak Louder." So, tell us a little bit about what you all are doing.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Megan O'Donnell. I am the Gender and Inclusive Growth Policy Lead at an organization called ONE, or the ONE Campaign, which is most frequently known for being co-founded by Bono from U2. But what we are beyond our brilliant co-founder is a global movement, a campaigning and advocacy organization of almost 10 million people worldwide. About 3 million of whom are based in sub-Saharan Africa, which is our region of focus. Actions Speak Louder speaks to our philosophy. We are constantly telling people, we don't want your money. We're not asking for donations. We don't do service delivery or programming ourselves. What we want is your voice. We believe that in order for the changes that we want to see in the world to truly be enacted at the ambitious scale that we're striving for, we're going to need to influence policy at the highest levels, both at the national level, obviously regionally within Africa for us as a focus, and then globally, right? Looking at Davos and the World Economic Forum, looking at the G7 and the G20. These are occasions that we find to be able to set the agenda and to bring really ambitious financial and policy reform commitments to the table. So, hoping that these 10 million people, and ever growing, are going to be using their voices to be taking actions, whether that's signing a petition with us or whether that's showing up to talk to their congressman or woman on the Hill. We do lobby days here in the United States, or showing up to talk to a governor, right, in Kaduna or Kebbi State in Nigeria. That's going to be the kind of change that ensures that the people are driving the types of policies that are going to lead to women's economic empowerment.
Well, and just to go back to you just for a second, one of the things that you said that impressed me, and it was kind of the point here, education isn't enough. In fact, education isn't even valuable if you're hungry. Can you talk a little bit about poverty eradication?
Yeah. So ONE was founded at its outset with a view towards the eradication of extreme poverty. We were not initially founded as an organization that focuses on gender equality. That sort of evolved over time, and I joined the organization a couple of years ago with the strong evidence base behind myself and the organization that it's going to be the empowerment of women and girls, right? That leads to that multiplier effect that's going to lead to extreme poverty reduction. There's no other way of going about it if you're leaving half the population behind. But with that focus on extreme poverty especially, we understand that economic empowerment can't be viewed in a silo, right? As other speakers have alluded to today, it's not only going to be about access to finance or markets or mentors or networks, tertiary education, gender parity on your board. At the foundation, women and girls are going to need access to basic health care. They're going to need access to equal nutrition. To sanitation facilities in their schools, to family planning, right? To be able to control their fertility before we can even think about their equal participation in the economic sphere.
Well, and this, Rick, is how we're going to have enough jobs in the world. I'm convinced this is part of the solution, is when you bring everybody up, there is work. So you mentioned a word, and it came up in a couple of other comments, but let's talk about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship for a minute, because you have a strong opinion on this.
I have strong opinions about a lot of things.
That's good. That's good.
To my family's dismay, but I do. I mean, we've all heard them, there are studies out there that say diversity or mentors are better at effectuating change with respect to diversity than, say, diversity training, right? So that's kind of a standard. But when you look at mentorship, I think mentorship has to go much further than that. There's got to be sponsorship. And when I say sponsorship, I mean somebody has got to be sitting at that table in that room representing you so that you get heard. So I talk to everybody, I'll talk to every single one of you if you want me to talk to you, but that doesn't mean that when push comes to shove and you need to get to that next level, you need to understand what it takes, that I'm that sponsor for you. So when you're looking for someone to mentor you, push them to the next level, you have to have someone who's going to mention your name in that room, stand up for you, and be your advocate so that you have an opportunity to get to the table. Sometimes that also means talent, so lend them your skills, lend them your experiences. Everybody has to make mistakes. I tell my daughter all the time, make your mistakes. Just don't make the ones that I make. So let me give you some insight. Don't make my mistakes. Make your own, make new ones. Your time, spend time helping them, guiding them, giving them the things that you learn so that they, again, don't have to walk that same path. Let them walk a new path. And then your treasure. Put your money where your mouth is. So when women or minorities want to start something, whatever it is, I don't care what it is, a t-shirt company, whatever, lend your treasure to them as well. Your time, your talent, and your treasure. That's sponsorship. Mentorship stops shy of getting to what? The long game.
Well, and that builds on something we talked about in terms of participation and impact. So it kind of sounds good. You know, you got a lot of, sometimes there's a lot of churn, but is there really enough impact? Do you want to, yeah.
Well, before I speak to participation, I just want to reflect back on Samm's comments. And I've spoken to a lot of women who ask the question, how do I find a sponsor? And my answer is actually to turn it around. So sponsorship is important when one's looking for an executive sponsor, but you can also be a peer sponsor. So when you're in the meeting and someone brings up that there's an initiative, whether it's corporate social responsibility, and I'm looking at my colleagues in the audience here, whether it's, for, what our societies around the world can accomplish or what universities can accomplish, to say, Anne or Wanda or Kendall is the person who you need to ask that question of. So I think that that's a really critical first step. So you are the sponsor. But to answer the question then about participation, I would love to go on and on about many things I know nothing about, but there are three things that I do know at least a little bit about that I think can fall under the category of economic participation. One is women as asset owners. Another is women as investment professionals, and then the third is women as business owners. And when we talk about entrepreneurship and education leading to women's empowerment, it's often to speak to that third element as business owners. And I heard several of our earlier speakers reflect back on the role of microfinance. So just a quick comment about that. There are many papers, starting back with the work that the Grameen Bank has done, but showing that in microfinance, a loan made to a woman will be repaid at a higher rate. It's more likely to lead to success for that individual, and then the results of that raises up both that family and they bring that back into their own community. So that is absolutely time proven. A second reason why having women in business is so critical is what we refer to as the diversity bonus. And there's an academic, Scott Page, who has a book on that. But more broadly, it's the idea that having more diverse voices actually lead to better ideas. And there's a mathematical formula that shows that having, the wisdom of crowds fails when all of the voices are saying the same thing, right? So until the time that we do have 50% of the board being women, we know that every additional woman that we adds to that diversity. Then moving back to investment management specifically, that's where the ideas that are brought to bear in investment management will actually be better. With CFA Institute, the last 6 words of our mission statement is for the ultimate benefit of society. So we know that every investment manager, every private wealth manager is thinking about that end beneficiary. And one individual woman is not going to make necessarily better choices than one individual man. But an investment team, when there are more women's voices on it, it's been time proven that the outcomes will be better.
Well, so I'm going to turn it maybe to a little bit more personal conversation of just how has your life experience been? And you mentioned the glass ceiling and the sticky floor. It's great to feel all this hope kind of coming out of these conversations. But still, I'm very struck at a personal level how hard sometimes it is to go forward. And we all mentioned that oftentimes we hear year after year, meeting after meeting, we are the only woman in the room. And then when you kind of look around and you reflect on your own life experience, a lot of times other women really haven't helped you very much either. I mean, I was sharing a personal story recently sort of recently, about how another person was being hired for a team. It was a man, younger, less experienced, and they wanted to pay him more. And I was like, excuse me. So it still happens, 30, 40 years still out in the field, you run into it over and over again, and this recommendation was made by a woman. So what, as catalysts, and as you said, sometimes your sponsor is your peer, what are the things maybe you're doing through your either personal life or your professional life to be catalytic for other women? Would you want to start?
Absolutely. So we are obviously focused on advocacy externally, as I mentioned, to policymakers, to private sector decision makers. I also see my role as the gender policy lead at One as an internal advocacy role. And I'm a big believer that social norms change and behavior change is going to be a very gradual process. And so you can hope to change the hearts and minds, and gradually you will. But in the meantime, how do we develop the processes, policies, procedures, kind of the institutional framework to mitigate that kind of bias from harming women or people of color or other sort of disadvantaged groups inadvertently even. So one of the first priorities coming into my organization personally was a focus on pay transparency. Right? The more sort of data at a woman's disposal or any employee's disposal, the more likely they are to be able to have those informed conversations with the supervisor, with management, to be able to say, actually, there's this gap that's not explained by our differences in experience, my time and tenure at this organization. So can we do a little bit of digging to see if this has been a risk of pay negotiations, right? We have a lot of evidence to say that women are less likely to come to the table and sort of self-advocate in those ways. So the more transparent, the better, I think, is one example. And how across the board can you be designing an institution that mitigates that type of bias, whether in your caregiver sort of leave policies, whether in your flexible work arrangements, to make sure that those things aren't standing in the way.
So data does make a difference.
Huge difference.
Arm yourself with information.
Yeah.
Samm?
I mean, I own a firm with a woman, so I mean, that's in and of itself, I think, the first step for us. We live and breathe it every day. So you mentioned kind of policies, work policies. We are extraordinarily focused on ensuring that everyone in our firm has the ability to be who they are in their personal and their professional life. Because if they are strong in their personal life, we are hoping, and we have evidence that transfers to their professional life. So it does not behoove us at all to, we don't have sick days. You get 5 sick days this year. If you're sick, you're sick. Take care of yourself, because you'll come back to us a stronger person. We give, and these are just the minor things, we give, the entire firm shuts down between Christmas and New Year's, because it costs me nothing to do that. It costs us nothing to do that, but to allow people to be with their families and have that time where they don't have to, rush into the office, costs us nothing, but it gets us so much. So our support of our team's life and helping them just be is our first step at making the impact. When you look at a firm, we've probably got to do a better job at diversity. We don't have any white males in our firm, but we think about it every day. It's a conscious effort that we ensure that we are, have a diverse firm, because we do believe that it's about diversity of thought, position in life, careers. We have outside people coming in, we promote from within. So it's this kind of full picture of diversity, and our pay scale is based on exactly what you do and how well you do it. So that is how we base our pay. It's your experience, your expertise, and that's how we hire people as well. So we look at the resumes, we get resumes in, and we have them blind, so we don't have the name. We just want to read the criteria. Now, somewhere along there, if they belong to XYZ sorority, then it gives it away. But we try and make it as blind as possible, because we're looking at the skill set when we hire people. So that's kind of how we look at it in the firm.
Mm-hmm. And anything you'd add from CFA?
No, simply to say in my personal life, as opposed to representing CFA, I speak with women often about the importance, when you find your voice, of speaking with conviction. And when you evaluate opportunities, and Samm had already spoken to the idea of the long game, but what that looks like sometimes is deciding to actually not take a job with marginally better pay, but instead to take one that expresses your passion and where there's an opportunity for advancement in the future and for you to make a real difference.
Thank you. I love that. Well, I think part of it too was we wanted to think about, and you all are going to get to ask questions soon, so be developing them in your mind. But I also want to think about what can we do here in this room, and you all who are together for this week, because I think it's that he for she power as well, and it's us for each other power. It's the partnerships, it's that you're going to form here, it's the being the sponsors for each other as you go forward. My advice to my younger self, which I didn't answer at the beginning, would have been from the very outset to be much more tactical about maintaining my networks, of really thinking, and now having worked almost 40 years, the same people I've kept in touch with 10 years ago are powerfully important for me today. And I think that it is true. I think men in other ways, and maybe in earlier generations, had more built-in formulas for developing a network. When I came to the University of Virginia in 1976, by the time I got here, it was 50% women, but there weren't really sororities. Not that I would have been a candidate to say, but it was kind of just a big group of women that really didn't bond together necessarily over a passion or out of a sort of shared commitment to support each other. So before we open this up to questions, which is coming very rapidly, I guess I want to ask each of you if there's anything you'd like to say to the folks in this room that they could very specifically do, and maybe even in particularly in your case, in policy area.
Absolutely. So I've alluded to the fact that, right, we want your voice, not your money, as a global movement of people in the global north and the global south. So one has a chapter on grounds, UVA students who decide to spend some of their time outside of the classroom working with us to use their voice to eradicate extreme poverty, especially within Africa. I think just worth noting, for all of us in this room, that as we are on our own individual journeys, and certainly as women in this room in particular, we need to be cultivating those networks, looking for those sponsors, making sure that we're speaking up around, the conference room table or whatever the case may be. We also have to sort of reflect on the fact that just by virtue of being here, we already are so far ahead of so many people who will not have the opportunity to be in this room or be part of these networks. So using that power to pay it forward and to be lending a voice to the needs, constraints, priorities of those who are living in contexts that look very different from the ones where we are currently located. I think, we've talked about that very important sort of micro level, person to person representation and sponsorship. How can we be scaling that and looking at that globally to ensure that, me located in DC or someone else located in Europe or in a capital in Africa or South Asia or what have you, is using their potential, their education, their skills, and their passions to ensure that all of that is applied to make the lives of others who don't have those opportunities better.
Advice for people in this room, Samm?
This is, we want to have impact, I think, right? So when you think about women and introducing them into the workforce, right? I'm a baby of the 60s, right? So I had that, mom's going to work and all of this other. So there was a lot of, just introducing women in a meaningful way into the workforce. I think looking at it just at that level, it's a quality versus quantity question for me, and I challenge you all to think about that. It's wonderful to be able to check the boxes and say that you have 50% of your workforce as women, but I challenge you to say how many of those people are in the C-suite? How many of those people in our business are CIOs, chief investment officers, making the money decision, controlling billions of dollars? So when you think about empowering women and women's entering into the workforce and their economic empowerment, think about the number of women in that decision-making role. Once you get women into the decision-making role, trust me, you will get more women into the workforce as a whole.
Which will be better for everybody.
Yeah, and let me just reflect back to that. I was 21 years in asset management, and we never once had a woman in our partnership there. So, but looking out to the room, I would reflect back to the fact that we are the difference, and that not only is it about the change that we can make, but it is about how we do that. So with kindness and with curiosity and with passion.
And ethics.
And ethics, which is the center point for CFA Institute. Thank you for that, Kat.
So we are now opening this up for questions. And I think there's someone, Drew's, we have a mic right here. Questions? Oh, don't be shy. There we go, this gentleman. I could see it in his eye.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ahsan Gul. I'm from Pakistan. I have a social enterprise of my own in Pakistan called the Green Box, under which we started this fellowship called Impact Partner Fellowship. So we have 26 young women working on different social development goals and objectives, and we are actually teaching them how to leverage partnerships for going ahead and taking their work forward in the community, but also trying to leverage partnerships with public sector, the corporate sector and all. But the issue is, the challenge which we're facing is the tokenism. Because a lot of the corporate partners which we have reached out to, we kind of not agree with their vision or the few things which they're doing, But unfortunately, the corporate landscape is so small that we have to work with them. We have to start somewhere. As Rick said, that we have to start somewhere. So do we have any one-on-one techniques on how to really leverage those corporate partnerships on our agenda, or like moving forward with our social vision and trying to articulate those partnerships accordingly?
I think kind of a question about the pipeline and tokenism and how do you combat that? Anybody like take a shot at it?
Do one of you want to start as corporate representatives?
That's a very, very, one of the hardest things I think that we face in business, right, is when you look at the boardrooms and the companies across the country, they are generally really all white men. So it's very difficult to effectuate change in an organization that when they look around and they look at each other and say, the firm's doing great, right? Yeah, we're doing well, to then have them want to invite someone in. So I think really from your perspective and from anybody who's trying to make this change, it is a conversation, a constant conversation with the CEO. And know that the CEO is engaged every day. And I think that's where you begin to start to see the change, is that the CEO, the leader of the firm, is setting the tone on a day-to-day basis. And this is not just a woman issue, by the way.
Yeah.
This is an everybody issue, and it's not ours to fix or to be fixed. It's a union. So to have a person like Rick stand up and have his voice heard is the message, I think, that has to be told across the board. So really kind of focusing, my thought would be to focus on and with the CEO to make sure that they're sending the message to their team and constantly sending that message.
Okay. Another question right there.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ekene. I'm an Atlas Scott Fellow from Nigeria. And I would like to commend you, ladies. You are an inspiration. The fact that you guys have gotten to that level of management, it created a pathway for other women like myself to believe that, yeah, I could actually get to the top of a financial institution or a financial firm and be a strong woman and make decisions that would benefit other women like myself. And I would also like to commend Megan. I'm a big follower of One campaign back in Nigeria. I'm like your online invisible fan. I follow your advocacy, and yeah, I also lend my voice a lot with social media and Facebook. But I have a question. With all the petitions and collecting people's voices, how do you get the message passed across to the leaders? Because I know that in Nigeria, for instance, we're planning towards the next election, and we need our voice to be heard. We have, leaders that don't want to come down for younger people to take the lead, and they make decisions that benefit them. And we want our voice to be heard so that decisions like about women would also be considered in policy making. So how do you ensure that our voices and our thoughts are passed across to the leaders? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and so happy that you're already connected to us back home. I'd say two things. First, we have external advocacy, really visible, really public. And the campaign that we actually just launched, When You Go Home, to check out is called One Vote Naija, so vote your future as a slogan. We did extensive surveying across the country of what the youth priorities are for the next election cycle. Things like unemployment, things like healthcare, things like quality education, to make sure that when we are going out publicly to those potential presidential candidates, we are representing the voices of people in that country, born and raised, who know that context best. The other thing that I'm more focused on, kind of on the policy side behind the scenes, in an insider baseball kind of way, is making sure that we're doing the data analysis of budgets, of policies, to make sure that when we're within a smaller setting, kind of behind closed doors with policymakers, the recommendations that we're putting forth to them in coalition with other civil society organizations, right, Oxfam, ActionAid, those guys, are really rooted in reality and where we need to be going on a trajectory. So right now, looking, for example, at agriculture budgets and the national investment plans for agriculture for the country. Nigeria is spending 2% of its budget on agriculture. We recognize that we're going to need at least 10% in order to meet commitments under this thing called the Malabo Declaration that the African Union in 2014 all signed on to. And so how do we make sure that we work to that trajectory? So it's outside, it's visible, it's public, it's getting their attention, knowing that their citizens' votes are going to decide one way or the other whether they're successful, and then it's behind the scenes making sure that we're pushing the right policies.
Well, I must say, all of us boomers are relying on you millennials to get it right. So we've been looking very hard. So I think we have time for one more question. Who's got one that they're just And I want to thank you all for saying your name and where you're from. I think that's been such a nice way of including you in the conversation. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bridget. I'm from out of state, Indiana, and my question is, how can we encourage our men to be a part of this movement to empower women and to make sure that they are represented at the top levels of leadership, especially our millennial men, right? They are going to be following the footsteps of men in leadership already. So how can we ensure that, because we are having issues at the top levels of men supporting women, so how can we ensure that our millennial men will change that?
I'm going to let everybody sort of take a shot at running through that as our wrap up here. I think that's a great question in the sense that we sometimes treat women as this monolithic group, and we're not. You know, we're just as complicated as everybody else. I would say my personal career has only been advanced by men. So I'm a big proponent. I think men are there for women and women are there for men. And I do see some hope in the younger generation where there are increasingly more women in leadership positions. So people are kind of used to the idea that it's okay. It's not quite so lonely. However, I don't think that is going up very fast. And I do think it's your personal relationships. You have to be the voice to call it out. Whether you're sitting in the room and somebody takes credits for somebody else's idea, man or woman, that you do it through your families, through your children. In my case, I don't have any, so I'm doing it through everybody else. But I think it's a culture change. I think it's at the heart of this kind of toxic masculinity, which really doesn't help anybody.
Well, I would start by just saying, first from a humorous perspective and then pivoting, but you know, in investment management, I think it was Gordon Gekko who said greed is good. So I would switch that to instead say that demonstrating outcomes. So when you talk to your boss, who might be a man, telling him that your ideas are the right ideas this time in this situation, and these are the reasons why it's going to make him look good. And by him drawing on more diverse voices, that it's going to have a better outcome that will be demonstrable and observable. So I go back to fact-based, all the statistics we've been hearing.
I think this is a tall order, right? Because there are cultural things there that are just hard to break down. So I think it's a really tall order, and I think it's nice for us to say, tell them this and tell them that, and we all believe it and we've all done it. But I think the reality is that it's so deep-rooted in society. If you think about, when you think about a leader and the characteristics of a leader, it's aggressive and strong and those words. And if those words are attached to us, then we get a different label, right? And so that's not a leader. Women are usually more communal, they're kind and caring and all of this, and that's not considered leadership. So I think we have to really try to reverse that, and as women and men accept the fact that if a woman is strong and, I hate the word aggressive, but determined, resilient, assertive, all better, then that's okay. That is okay. She's not that word that you would love to call her. She is just like you. She's strong and assertive, and that's okay. So that would probably be the message. It's a slow shift and sea change, but we got to start. So let's start. Every voice, and we need our men to say it for us as well. So if you're saying it to your men, have your men say it to other men when they're in that locker room. Have them say that.
Bring it home, Megan.
Yeah, could not agree more with that catalytic effect. And I think right now, gratefully, fortunately, we are seeing a lot of men stand up in protests, in the Me Too conversation, to lend their voices as allies. So how do we cultivate that even more and continue to build on that momentum. And then I think to complement that long game, again, going back to those sort of institutional short-term wins, and the greed is good, I think is a good way to put it, that there will be some people who are convinced of the moral or the ethical case. There will be other people who just look at their bottom line and say, if I'm not lending to women at equal rates, I am not reaping the returns that I potentially could. Right. If women are making most of the consumer spending decisions for their households and I'm not targeting my goods or my services to them, then I'm leaving money on the table. So that business case coupled with the moral, ethical, catalytic effect, I think is the way to go.
Well, she brought it home. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. You guys have been great.